like a locomotive, sipping, drinking Arizona. Mixtape just around the corner, did a lot in California. Can't wait to drop this on you. Yeah, they gon' have fun with that. Smash like song.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey here, late on a Sunday night to help recap the penultimate race of the 2022 Formula One World Championship from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Can you believe it? 21 of 22 races now over and done with. And that means next weekend we're off for the season finale in Abu Dhabi. And that's it. It's over and done with. Hard to believe, but time certainly flies. We will, of course, recap and reflect and go over the season that was in a future episode. But earlier tonight, I sat down with our very good friend Tim Hauraney from the TSN Racing Pod to recap what was a very eventful and very exciting weekend of racing in Sao Paulo. And it really was something exciting and epic to watch, right from the beginning in qualifying on Friday through the sprint race on Saturday, and of course the Grand Prix on Sunday afternoon. There was action basically all weekend long, and it was, from my point of view, hopefully from yours as well, a very, very enjoyable racing weekend. Anyways, Mark and I will be back on Thursday night for the regular weekly pod, and until then, I'm going to throw it over to Tim. Tim, take it away.
Welcome everyone, I'm Tim Hauraney. You're listening to the TSN Racing Pod. If you want more TSN Racing Pod, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Please head on over to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same with Apple Podcasts, as it does help us grow the pod. And today we are doing Brazil Grand Prix review. And joining me to do that is Mr. Mark Dailey from the Scuderia F1 Pod. Mark, how are you?
Good, man. What happened? I'm still trying to digest this whole weekend. It was insane, but I loved it all.
It was pretty wild, right?
Absolutely.
Let's get right into it. Start with qualifying on Friday. We'll jump to Q3. Quite a bit to unpack with Q3. Where should we begin? With Ferrari or at the other end of the grid?
Okay, let's just kind of like put this in context, because I was out at Remembrance Day ceremonies on Friday. I got home, I got changed, I had my shower, I picked up my phone, and I automatically went to Instagram, and I saw from the Haas official feed, K-Mag jumping up, everybody cheering, and I'm like, what is this? And then, so I'm like, oh my God, no, K-Mag did not get pole. So like immediately I ran down to like fire up F1 TV Pro to go back and watch qualifying. And what a crazy qualifying session that was. I mean, you go back when on our show on Thursday, we took a look at what the weather was going to be like. And it just looked like we were going to get some wet weather at some point during the proceedings. But it looked like we might kind of sort of get like a dry line, a dry-ish qualifying, but it was kind of wild at the end, and there was guys all over the place, but it was exciting. And props to K-Mag and Haas. I mean, they just managed to get it, everything just like worked out perfect for them. It's a great story too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the lap itself was really interesting. As you heard with drivers trying to like search for grip, and one of the difficult challenges was with this weekend is because the tarmac at the Brazil Grand Prix is actually quite dark.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more difficult to look for grip when it rains. So for K-Mag, part of his lap searching, for grip was trying to find a bit of a dry line in Sector 2. And it was really quite fascinating to watch his onboard and see which types of lines he was choosing just by where he was actually looking and thinking that he saw a dry line appear. That was a legit lap from
100%.
Magnussen. Like,
yeah,
it was pretty good, man. Like smart of Haas to get him out right away. Obviously, having the advantage of being at that end of the pit lane for sure, but taking advantage of being where they were, which is quite remarkable. And I've followed this team for a really long time. I have a lot of friends on the team as well, and it was really cool. And I mean, what more can you say, really? I think one of the things that stood out to me the most was he was speaking with Sky Sports, and he had mentioned how he really appreciates things a lot more now than when he was younger, when he just expected things. And I thought, like, wow, you know, that's a really mature and grown up, you know, Kevin Magnussen, because I remember, you know, interviewing him back in Austin, Texas, and I kind of actually thought that because I've interviewed him now quite a few times, and every time I've interviewed him, he's always seemed to have like this progression in maturity daily. It was it was such a great story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love those really genuine moments of emotion, like, and that's why I loved seeing that video that they posted on their Instagram page. And you know, it's like you go back to when Lando got his first points or his first podium back in Austria a couple of years ago, and you just go back, you listen to him in the car, like the emotion is just raw, it's pure, and it's great to see. Like, I mean, it would have been cool if K-Mag had the helmet off, but you could see the smile through the helmet, and just the looks on like everybody's face in the garage, and see Gunther coming across the pit lane. It's just cool because, you know, like you can talk about like Haas, you know, they're bottom of the, you know, back of the pack and all those sorts of things, but like you say, that was a legit lap. I mean, they earned that, and you can say, oh yeah, well, the weather helped them out. Well, yeah, sure, but everybody got a lap in, and like you say, he nailed it. I mean, don't take away anything from Kevin Magnussen, because he went out there and just laid it down. You know, it was cool to see.
As for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc not laying one down, that was a bit of a kerfluffle with the old strategy there, Mark.
Yeah. No comment. I feel like we're just kind of like, you know, beating the same old tune here, and, you know, again on the drum. It's one thing or another when it comes to Ferrari this year, and I just kind of feel like it's on brand for 2022 with Scuderia Ferrari. It's just like I saw it and I was like watching. I'm just like, yeah. That seems about right. It's like, let's put a line under 2022 for Ferrari, go back to Maranello for the winter, and let's come back in 2023. I know we got one more race, but, you know, wow.
I know, but still, though, I think at the other end of this, I mean, I think if you're Charles Leclerc, that has to be. I mean, he looked like that was the tipping point. I haven't seen him that frustrated by the team yet this season. And there has been like a lot of frustrating moments, and this actually looked like it was body language wise, you know, the tipping point, I think for him. Like it didn't look good, Mark. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know why he didn't just make the call himself. Like, once he saw that everyone else was out on the slick tire, why didn't he just go out, do the recon lap, and then come in? Like, just all he needed to do was go through sector 1 and 2, and you know, essentially he would have figured out what the track conditions were like and just make that call to come in. Like, this is getting to the point where I think for Charles Leclerc, I think it's time to put the nice guy stuff aside, and he's going to have to start forcing his will on this team if he wants some change to happen, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can talk about it in a minute what happened in the race, but I mean, it was very much like at the end of the race on this afternoon when he wanted, you know, he was saying something to the effect of, well, can you think about the championship and switching us around? And it's kind of like, well, you know, your teammate's on for a podium, and do you really want to be, you know, like, do you really want to be like Binotto to tell, you know, like Carlos, who earned that podium, right, to back off for Charles? I mean, you know, when it comes down to it, I mean, that's why as a team principal, you're making the big bucks. You got to make these tough calls. But it just it kind of seemed like it was another, you know, we put together qualifying, and then, you know, what happened to him in the sprint race, and then in the race itself, all these, you know, the whole weekend, and some of these different things that sort of come up to the surface, like you say. It's just like it's more frustration. It's when does he get to the breaking points? And yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you. I mean, sure, you got to stop being Mr. Nice Guy, but also, you know, when we were talking about K-Mag being more mature, I guess, you know, maybe it's not maturity, maybe it's a driver. Do you want to call it experience or whatever it is? Because I mean, Charles relatively is still fairly young. I mean, he's not a teenager. I mean, he's in his early 20s, right? But I mean, he should be experienced enough to maybe make that call. I mean, that's one of those things I said that sets the really good drivers apart from the great drivers, is maybe just making that call on the fly. Is like, I don't care what you guys are saying. This is the right choice. This is what we need to do. Mm-hmm. So I can't help but think that maybe, like you say, he's got to start imposing some of his, his desires on the team. I mean, if he's going to be like the legit undisputed number one at Ferrari, right? Tough job, but It is what it is.
Which I think is only going to get harder for him moving forward. I really do, simply because of how Carlos Sainz has started to really put it together. And especially after the summer break, he's been extremely strong. And the car's not going to change like that much, right? Like, it's not like we're going to have a brand new looking Ferrari that's gone in a totally different direction where they can, change everything on this race car. Ferrari's not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. If anything, they've already got a strong car, just got to improve on it in certain areas. And Sainz has already figured the car out. So at the end of the day, this guy isn't going to get any weaker. He's just going to get stronger. And I think that may end up tipping the hand of Matteo Binotto. And instead of having to look at Charles Leclerc as your number one, who's to say that they don't start looking at Carlos Sainz as that number one later on next season, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen here. And hey, look, Carlos is no slouch. He's proved it. He beat Charles Leclerc in 2021 in the Drivers' Championship. And now look at what he's doing, that he's figured everything out with this car. And so for next season, I just think that if you're Charles Leclerc, I think you have to really start throwing your weight around, or else, who's to say that this thing doesn't start going in Carlos Sainz's way?
Well, you make a great point. As I go back and look at the results since we came back from the summer break, Charles had a run of 5 podiums from Holland all the way up to Dakota a couple of weeks back. He had 2 pole positions, and you look at Carlos. He's had 2 podiums, but if you just kind of like look over the course of the longer season, Carlos has had 6 DNFs. He's retired 6 times for various reasons. And you look, there's about 54 points between them in the World Championship. I mean, on paper, there's a big distance in the championship between them. But, if he finishes a bunch more races than he retired, I mean, that gap could be a lot smaller. And I've maintained for a while now that I think that Carlos Sainz, he kind of flies under the radar a little bit. I mean, sometimes, the results aren't quite there, and not always through his own fault, but I don't think that there's any doubt that this guy is a really, really good driver. And I just don't think he gets enough, respect. I don't think he gets the respect that he deserves, not just at Ferrari, but even just over the course of his career.
Yeah, 100%. And, if we've looked at how that career has actually gone for him, fighting to stay in Formula One, never really had anything really just handed to him. He's always had to fight to hang on in F1, and he's gone up against some pretty impressive teammates and come out the other side on the other end, as the better driver in some points. And, now he's at one of the best teams on the grid, and he's not showing that he's having too many weaknesses. He's pretty impressive. And, I honestly do not see him as a number 2 driver next season. I just don't. I didn't see it this season either, to be perfectly honest with you. And he wasn't really treated as such either, Dailey. So I don't know. I'm interested and curious to see how, next season goes, apart from, a couple other teams as well that we'll get into a little bit later. As for the sprint race, I've never been a huge fan of these, and the race on Saturday I actually really enjoyed a lot.
Me too.
And and I think, I was talking to Chris Medlin about this a few days ago, and one of the things we were discussing was that F1 had been talking about, well, maybe they don't use the sprint race as the starting grid for the big race on Sunday. It's kind of like, well, what's the point really, right? Like, we were just kind of discussing, well, what else could they actually do? I mean, this kind of actually seems like the more logical thing to do. It's trying to find the racetracks where sprint races are going to work.
100%. And Interlagos is one of those tracks. I mean, it's an old school track. It's great. It's got like that change in elevation. It's got a nice roll to it, if you want to say that. A lot of great corners, some nice fast sections as well. It's not super wide, but we've seen some great racing there over the years. And for the sprint format, it just really works. And I was just kind of thinking, okay, if we have 3 or 4 races like that a season, or venues like that per season, then the sprint race becomes a legit thing. But like you say, it's just finding those tracks where it really works. But then, I guess maybe, like how does Formula One handle it? Because, you might have other tracks saying, well, hang on, we want to host a sprint race as well. But, it's like, where do you kind of strike that balance between the needs of the wants of the race organizers and what's good for the spectacle of Formula One? Because, if you take qualifying on Friday, the sprint race on Sunday, and then the race on Saturday, and then the race on Sunday, I mean, this weekend really had it all. And I can't help but thinking if we had similar sprint races then like we saw in Brazil, that across the entire season, I can see people legitimately getting jacked up for this rather than, sprint race, meh. It's like, which is kind of how it's evolved over the past year or two since these things got introduced, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I put a poll out on my Twitter, and it's still for sprint races. A lot of people are still kind of in the middle on this. They're kind of like, yeah, I don't love it. I don't hate it. I'm still kind of, the jury is still kind of out on it. As for the sprint grid, Kevin Magnussen leading the way here. I actually didn't think, Mark, he was going to be able to lead a full lap. But he did.
He did. I mean, it wasn't too much of a surprise that he quickly got gobbled up. But I mean, full respect to him. I mean, considering like in the sprint race, where you've got at the front there, you've got K-Mag, you got Max, you got George, you got Lando, Carlos, Esteban. I mean, he's no pushover. Fernando, Lewis, Sergio, and Charles Leclerc. The next 9 cars behind you, and the fact that after 24 laps, he still comes home in the 8th and final point paying position in the sprint race. I mean, full respect to the guy. I mean, I think they like we talked about earlier, K-Mag and the team did a great job to help get that pole, but the fact that they were still able to grab some points out of that, I think that's great. And then maybe putting the cart a little bit before the horse here. That's why it's just a shame at the beginning of the race on Sunday that he got taken out by Danny Ricciardo. It was kind of an anticlimactic end to Kevin Magnussen and Haas's weekend. It was a shame, but I mean, what he did, I mean, it's got to be a big boost of adrenaline for him and the entire team.
George Russell coming away with the win, capturing the 8 points, and Russell bagging his first sprint race victory. Now, Carlos Sainz followed close behind, but he ended up having to take a grid penalty for the start of the Grand Prix on Sunday. Then Lewis Hamilton rounding out the top 3. Mercedes this weekend were absolutely flying out there. And you heard from Toto Wolff following the race, and it really sounds like the upgrade package that they brought to COTA, they're really starting to figure it out. I think they still suffer from a really draggy car. I don't think that's anything that will be able to be fixed by the time they get to Abu Dhabi. That's something that's going to be with them for till the end of the season, obviously. But it really sounds like this team has pinpointed all of the areas of problems with the W13, which then, leads me to think that, okay, well, Mercedes, I think, are back in it. And I think next season, I think it's going to be Red Bull, Mercedes again going head to head, and then you're going to sprinkle in Ferrari here and there, because Mercedes looks pretty good at the end of the season here, Mark, and at the beginning of the season, it didn't look too good.
Bro, you're stealing my thunder here, but just to build on what you're saying, like, I felt that this weekend Mercedes looked like Mercedes, and I know it kind of seems a little bit kind of funny to say that 22 races into the year. I mean, like you so nicely explained, it's taken them a long time to kind of figure this car out, but I felt like this weekend that this just wasn't in a flash in the pan. This felt like Mercedes doing what they've done for so many years, and this just didn't feel like it. Just sort of they just kind of tossed the dice, and this weekend they got it right. It felt to me that this was like the end result of a lot of hard work that they've done over the course of the season to understand this car and figure it out within the constrictions, within the the format that they have of the cost gap. Because I mean, years gone by, you just kind of would have thrown money at the problem and people at the problem, and for a team like Mercedes, they could have maybe figured it out in 2 weeks or a month or 2 months or whatever it is, rather than over the course of a season. But they just, both Lewis and George, just looked good all weekend long, and the car looked great too.
And the Red Bull is obviously struggling with high tire drag in the sprint race, and I'm actually quite surprised that they even decided to run Verstappen on that medium tire. Granted, I understand that part of it was tactical in terms of saving, a soft tire or two for the Grand Prix on the Sunday. But at the end of the day, I mean, Russell started on softs, and at the end of all this, he put on the scrub set at the end on Sunday, and he was good to go, showing that the Red Bull strategy this weekend kind of let them down. Max obviously picking up a bit of damage in the sprint race as well, which affected some things, but he admitted that Mercedes was just too difficult to beat this weekend. And Charles Leclerc, I mean, again, recovery drive, impressive, moving his way up and finishing sixth, and he had Lando Norris seventh, Kevin Magnussen eighth, like you had mentioned, Vettel ninth, and Pierre Gasly in 10th. But the starting grid on Sunday looked a little different. The only things really is Yuki Tsunoda obviously having to start from pit lane, just because he had changed some components on the car. I was so surprised at George being able to not only get away, open a gap, but control the race, considering that's like one of his first times, really. I mean, one of his first, like, I know he's done it before, but in this season, for him to just go out there and take control of a race, it was absolutely impressive what I saw on Sunday from George Russell, including having a 7-time world champion breathing down your neck.
Yeah, you know what? I couldn't help it but thinking that you'll come the end of the race on Sunday, and George getting his maiden win, winning on the sprint race on Saturday, and just his weekend in general. This is like George Russell's coming of age party, right? And I can't help but thinking back several years ago now when he basically put together a whole presentation to take to Williams to, this is why you should put me in your car for this season, right? I mean, really throwing it all out there, and full credit to the guy, right? And that's where he really cut his chops in Formula One, and then he does, serves his time at Williams. He did a great job in the couple of years that he drove there, and then really, I don't really think that there was, you can kind of like maybe have the debate about how difficult it was for Toto to choose between him and Valtteri, but at the end of the day, I think that it was, the choice was pretty clear, that if you look at Valtteri, and despite all the good things he did for Mercedes, winning races, helping them win constructors titles, helping Lewis onto all those run of championships, I mean, George, he's just such an amazing prospect. I mean, there's no doubt that when you look at George Russell and you look at some of these other young drivers, like your Max Verstappens, your Landos, your Charles Leclercs, he definitely needs to be included in that conversation, because that was just such a professional, clinical drive from start to finish, from Friday all the way through to that checkered flag. And like you say, I mean, having his teammate behind him and controlling the race, and just it was flawless. It was impressive. And this is, I wouldn't say a win that was long time coming. I mean, it's taken a little bit of time, but I mean, the car hasn't been there all year for them, but when they had the car on, on that weekend, I mean, boy, did he ever raise some eyebrows this weekend for sure.
Yeah, they actually had a water leak on George's car. Toto had revealed that to us in his post-race press conference over Zoom that I jumped on. So George actually didn't know that. He actually didn't know that the car had a water leak, and the team wanted to keep it from him so he could just focus on the race. But this car wasn't that far off from literally, frying its own engine.
That's amazing.
And George didn't even know about it.
Wow.
So they literally just got this thing across the line. I think if you take a look at the Mercedes driver program, and George is actually, he actually is the first of the Mercedes drivers program, if we're, perfectly honest here. I mean, obviously, yeah, Lewis has won and stuff, but he wasn't a part of the driver development program, right? George is one of the first. And he 6 years, right? He's been just grinding away at this. And the team, Mercedes, they'd set him like a lot of hard targets to hit. And I think all of the work that George has had to put in, so GP3 title, Formula 2 title, spending all that time down at Williams, even though Toto did admit probably a year too long, just having to go through all of that has really molded him into just an incredible driver. Like, absolutely incredible. And going forward, with George and this team, I mean, I'm not going to say like it's not Lewis's team anymore. It's still Lewis's team, but I mean, here comes George Russell. Like, it's
100%.
It's going to be interesting to see how Toto manages all of that. I mean, Lewis is great and all, but like, he's a competitor. He gets out on the racetrack, man. He just wants to win, right?
Yep.
And same with George. Like, these are two competitive animals here, and they're going to go at it sometime next year. And it's going to be a juggling act, I think, at some points for Toto to kind of have to, like, manage that. And I think for George and Lewis to manage that relationship as well. I just he's definitely deserving Grand Prix winner, Mark, and I'm really excited for this team because they are going to have the best driver lineup on the grid next season. Like, oh my God.
It's scary, isn't it? And I mean,
yeah.
I think if you're Toto Wolff, I think you're going out into the garage and pulling out that box with the 2016 on it. I'm pulling out all those notebooks and all those notes that you made between and prior to 2016, between all the things that happened between Nico and Lewis, and just like kind of maybe going over some of those highlighted passages on, I could have done this better in managing that relationship between Nico and Lewis, or I could have done this in this situation. I mean, not to suggest that the relationship between Lewis and George is anywhere the same or close to what it was between Nico and Lewis, but it got to a place that you wouldn't want in any team at any time. I mean, when you have like a team principal of a team like Mercedes coming out saying, we're ready to part ways with one or both of these drivers if that's what it takes. I mean, I remember when Toto said that, I'm like, are you kidding me? This is like Lewis Hamilton. He's like multiple world champion. It's like Nico Rosberg. This guy could be a world champion too. I mean, this is prior to 2016 when he won his only chip, right? So, it's going to be interesting how he handles these two guys, because I mean, like you say, as much as this is Lewis's team right now, this is George's team somewhere down the road. And as we said earlier, that when it comes to like Ferrari, Mattia Binotto, that's why you get paid the big bucks to make these hard, tough calls as a team principal. I mean, same goes for Toto, man. It's like, wow.
The conversation during the press conferences was quite interesting. They're talking a bit about the W13, and George was asked if he were to take the W13 as it is now, back to Bahrain to the start of the season, and if he would be happy or happier. And George actually said if they ended up taking this car back to Bahrain right now, he said it would be over a second quicker.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's how much time they've clawed back in getting this thing to work, and all credit all credit is due to that team for really not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah,
I mean, they had lost so much time just trying to solve their porpoising issues that now they're starting to focus on other things. And I just think that moving forward, if we look at Abu Dhabi, actually, I'll ask you this question. Do you think Lewis Hamilton goes winless this season? Because if he does, you know what that means. It's the first season he's ever had in Formula One where he's never won a race, Mark.
Well, I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, Hammy and I were just talking it a couple of days ago on our podcast, saying that this could very well be the season that Mercedes doesn't record a win. I mean, obviously that's happened now. They have scored a win. I mean, they could potentially score one more win, because we still got to go to Abu Dhabi in a week or two or down the road here. But I mean, Lewis now has one shot to win it. So I mean, he's going to throw everything at it when they get to Yas. But I mean, the odds aren't looking good for him because I mean, they just did not get off to a good season. It was obvious that they were a step or two behind Red Bull and Ferrari because the conversation at the beginning of 2022 very quickly focused in between Red Bull and Ferrari and Max versus Charles. And it was just like, well, what's up with Mercedes? And it wasn't just like, oh yeah, just, they'll get this figured out in a race or two because it was clear they were quite a bit off the pace. And it's just gone on and on and on. And you have that one unforgettable moment in Baku when Lewis literally needs to be pulled out of the car because he's like so physically sore and he's just hobbling around like an old man, not to be ageist or age discrimination or anything, but he really looked like somebody that was in a severe amount of physical discomfort. And that was just like, it's just kind of blows my mind that they even got to that. But I mean, to their credit, they stuck with it and worked with this car because they could have just pulled the plug at any point during the season, said, forget it. We're going to throw our time and our energy into developing the car for 23. And this year it is what it is, but that's not in their DNA, right? I mean, Mercedes is built to win. So all credit to them. They stuck with it. It took them, 20 plus races to get that win, but never count Lewis out, but as much as he wants to win this final race in this of the season, there's 19 other guys that want to win that race as well. So yeah, he's got his work cut out for him.
Let's talk about the Hamilton Verstappen collision. I mean, Verstappen ended up getting a time penalty for it anyways. Verstappen had a nice fight back at the end of the day. We'll get onto that in a minute, but man, it was exciting to see those two going wheel to wheel into a corner again. I have to admit it. I got really excited to see it. I know some people didn't, and I understand that, but I don't know. There's just something with that rivalry between those two, man. It just reminds me of those, Senna Prost days and oh man, like Rosberg Hamilton days. It just, I don't know. There's just something juicy about it at the end of the day. How did you see that? Because I think actually Hamilton could have given Max just a tiny bit more room. But at the end of the day, I mean, hey, I'm surprised both of them weren't out of the race.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we saw, I mean, that we should maybe just set up that corner a little bit, because the way that you have the start at Interlagos, so you're kind of going up the hill a little bit past start finish, then it drops down a little bit into turn one. You do that hard left, then it starts dropping down into turn two, and then it drops a little bit more as you go into Curva do Sol in turn three. So, you know, I wouldn't say that my life flashed before my eyes, but, you know, certainly time slowed down going into T1, because I'm thinking Imola, I'm thinking Silverstone, and I'm thinking, you know, these guys are going to give each other they're going to really go to the push to the limits. And, you know, Max, he was ahead going into turn one, and then they go down the hill into turn two, and Lewis was definitely ahead. And that's why when and I think that Max gave Lewis enough room. I think that Lewis kind of gave him enough room but to the thinnest of margins, both of them, right? They were going to hold their line. And I think the reason why Max gets that 5-second penalty is, like, I think that the stewards are going to look at it saying, yeah, well, you know, you had the opportunity to back off. And I know, like, the window that he has to make that decision is so infinitely small that, I mean, it's like snap of a finger and it's gone. And then that's when Lewis comes across and they kind of crunch into each other. Bits of carbon fiber fly everywhere. But like you say, I'm surprised that both of these guys kept going. And at the end of the day, Lewis is on podium. Max, I mean, yeah, sure, he doesn't even get top 5, but I mean, he still gets P6. And yeah, you know, I was kind of a little bit surprised maybe that Max got the 5 seconds. I thought maybe they might call it a racing incident. So I was kind of 50-50, but at the end of the day, I was kind of like, yeah, that seems about right, because the opportunity just to lift slightly. And of course, the stewards, they have access to all the telemetry and everything else that, you know, they hopefully make the right call. I mean, that's up for debates in other situations, but that's just the way that I saw it as it unfolded.
I think at the end of the day, right, it's, I don't know. I just kind of saw it as a racing incident, to be honest with you, but
just maybe like prior history between these two factor into it. You know, that's what I thought too when he got nailed with the 5 seconds.
Yeah, me too. But at the end of the day, I mean, Lewis could have been in contention for, you know, the win at around that point. Like, not at exactly that point, but later on in the race, that win probably could have came to him a little bit more so than when it did towards the end of the race. That being said, did a great job to recover. I mean, both drivers did. And I think, like, you know, for Lewis, just not enough pace just to catch George and get by him there towards the end. As for Charles Leclerc, he wasn't too upset at Lando Norris. I think Leclerc felt that, you know, it looked like Norris had made a mistake and bumped into him. But man, I am so surprised that car was able to keep going.
Oh, me too.
I don't know how the hell Charles Leclerc kept that thing running. Really didn't.
Well, you know, after we had like the opening lap there, we get the safety car and everything, and then I see like Charles stuff it into the tires. I'm like, there we go. There's his weekend over. And I was surprised, and then all of a sudden it's like he's back going, and I'm like, yeah, he's gonna limp back to the pits, and the next thing we're gonna see Charles get out of the car. He's gonna have his head in the hands, just really disappointed, or, you know, walking away from the car in disgust. But I was shocked. But then at the end of the day, he ends up just off of the podium. And, you know, that's an interesting situation, right? Because he's fighting for second in the world championship against Sergio Perez from Red Bull. And then, as we were saying earlier, he's making that call on the radio, telling the team to think about the implications that it has for, you know, his world championship battle with Checo, and to think about switching the cars around. I mean, what is, I mean, I don't know. That's one of those calls that you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you're Ferrari, you make that call or you don't make that call. One of those drivers is going to be upset, you know. And I think that's I was going to say Sergio, that Carlos, he did such a great job. I mean, he took that 5 grid penalty or grid place penalty, and then still, ends up on the podium at the end of the day. But it's interesting, right? Because after the results, we get the final, we get the podium. We got George Lewis and Carlos. You got Charles, P5. You got Fernando. 6 is Max. Sergio ends up in 7th. We've got to talk about that in a minute. You got Esteban, Valtteri, and Lance Stroll rounding out to the top 10. So by the time it shakes out, now you got Sergio and Charles even on points going into the final race of the season. Now everything's to play for, but you can see, Charles is doing the mental arithmetic because Sergio was a non-factor today. Because, I mean, in the middle of the race, Lewis was he was taking chunks of time out of Sergio ahead of him. And that wasn't even, they weren't even racing each other. I mean, and he just kind of like dropped further and further back through the order. And then, he ends up behind his teammates. But yeah, it's... Like, what do you do if you're Ferrari? I think ultimately, I don't even know if it was the right call. I mean, I kind of I've had this conversation with myself all afternoon, and every time I think about it, I come up with a difference. Yeah, they made the right call. No, they didn't make the right call. Yeah, ask me again tomorrow. I'll probably tell you something different.
Yeah, I think they did, simply because it was pretty well earned by Carlos. You can't go and take a podium away from him.
Yeah.
I really just don't think that's not the right move. And I think that Leclerc is going to be able to finish this thing off. And I think Ferrari feels the same way. But at the same time, yeah, I just think you can't disgruntle the team that way. And people have to remember that when I say team, I mean Carlos's team.
Mm-hmm.
Because, everyone may think that, the crew, they work for the entire team. Well, no, they don't actually. They work on one car.
It's a team within a team.
It's a team within a team. And you don't want fractures showing up in your team. Now, if we take a look at it's similar to what could happen with the Perez Verstappen situation, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But the same thing, could transpire there. And as for Ferrari, they've got enough headaches to deal with as it is at the moment. Why add more to the pile? So I think just keeping things stationary as they were finishing, I think was the right move. As for Verstappen and Sergio,
wow.
Obviously Sergio letting Max go by, and with the understanding that he was going to get the spot back, right? And granted, Max was about 3 to 4 seconds, up the road, but still in the final lap, Max could have easily strategically slowed down in certain spots to give that spot back. Now, he doesn't do it. And then we heard the radio outbursts, and then we got the stuff in the post media from Sergio. And obviously, Sergio's pissed off at him. What
100%.
What did you expect? What did the team expect? What was going to happen? I know Sergio's saying that, hey, I won him those 2 championships or whatever the quote was. I'm paraphrasing here.
We'll go back to the whole Minister of Defense thing at Abu Dhabi last year, right? I mean, he gets a huge assist on that for that race alone, right?
Yes, 100%. And I don't think he was given enough credit for a lot of the things that he did. Sergio said, quote, "I think if Max has 2 championships, it's thanks to me."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's not wrong, but he's not right, obviously. But there are certain things that Sergio's had to sacrifice, obviously, to give the Max so he can win championships.
Yeah.
I wonder, Dailey, if this really rocks the boat at the team for next season, and if Sergio even gives a damn next season of helping him.
Well, I mean, at this point, how much time does Sergio legitimately have in Formula One? I mean, he's not long in the tooth, but I mean, he has less years in front of him than he has behind him, right? So it's just like if he's going to really try and do more, if he's going to accomplish more than what he's already accomplished, the opportunities are now fewer than, say, for Max Verstappen, who's like 10 years younger than him, right? But I mean, honestly, I was pissed off when I saw that whole thing, and when you heard Max on the radio, I was shocked at the way that he talked to his engineer. He said, and I'm just reading the quote here, he says, "I told you already the last time, you guys don't ask that again to me, okay? Are we clear about that? I gave my reasons and I stand by it." Okay, that sounds like me talking to my 5-year-old who's been extremely naughty and had a tantrum. And when I heard him say that to like his engineer, I was just like, wow, that is just not cold. That is just, I don't even know what that is. And I just like, I'd love to know what his reasons are, because he doesn't need the points. The championships are sewn up. He doesn't, he doesn't even really need to do anything at this point. I mean, like, I know he's programmed mentally to go out and win and drive as fast and do as well as he can each and every race, but it's just like, what about your teammate? You guys like could, you could like underline this season by getting not only the drivers' championship, the constructors' championship, you guys could finish 1-2 in the drivers' championship. And it's like, I felt like he was just flipping the birds to not just his teammate, but I felt like he was flipping the team off as well. And I was just like, that's not cool. That's really not cool.
A lot of this is believed to be from a rumor that happened after Monaco.
Okay.
With Sergio crashing out in Q3 and essentially ruining Verstappen's quali lap. Whether or not he would have gotten pole, that's another conversation for another time, because Leclerc was also, I think he was looking good for pole at that point as well. Leclerc ended up getting pole anyways, but that ruined Verstappen's chance. And Sergio ended up going on to win the Monaco Grand Prix.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rumor is that this actually is something that stems from that event. Now, Verstappen was asked, by the media multiple times, why didn't you do that? And he kept just responding with that he had his reasons for it. And moving forward, they're going on to Abu Dhabi, and if he needs the points because they're tied, he just felt that it wasn't at the end of the world. It was basically what he had said. I think, like, at the end of the day, if you're going to have a teammate who looks after you like that in some points, like Sergio Perez does, I mean, you got to take care of him sometimes,
Yeah.
You can't do that.
I know that like all the Max fans will come after me for this, and you're like a total Lewis Homer, but I'm trying to be as like middle of the road as possible on this, but just from a sporting point of view, I just don't see in the same situation Lewis doing that to Nico. Probably he would have done that. He wouldn't have helped out Nico in that situation, but I don't feel like he would have done that in the same situation for other teammates. I just got
a question. Yeah. I got a question for you.
Sure.
See if you remember anything. So, do you ever remember Schumacher doing something like that to Rubens Barrichello? Now, granted, Rubens did get messages to move over to let Michael go by to get wins on his way to winning championships. But did you ever hear anything like?
I guess
do you remember anything like that? Because I don't. Because I actually, the reason I bring it up, I had a social media individual. Person on Twitter messaged me.
Yeah.
Social media individual. I'm such an idiot. Person on Twitter.
It's one of your, bro, it's tweeps. It's one of your tweeps.
Yeah, so a person on Twitter actually asked me that question. If I ever remembered, Schumacher doing something like that to Barrichello, and I couldn't remember something like that, Rand. I could remember the times that he did move over for him, like so he could get the wins to get the championships, but I don't ever remember him taking a position and never giving it back.
Let's just say that in that relationship, in that pairing, I think like this whole situation is underscored by the Austrian Grand Prix that one year when Rubens was like winning, or he was leading and he was told to let Michael back. He wins the race. And then Michael was, I think it was such an awkward thing. And on the podium, I think like Michael was very uncomfortable, embarrassed about it, and made Rubens basically take the top step. Like, I think that was like his acknowledgement of like, yeah, I won the race, to help with my championship aspirations, but this is really yours, So, I mean, I felt like that was like a real public acknowledgement from Michael to what, like Rubens had like sacrificed, not just that day, but probably many, many other times in the past. That just kind of, to me, felt like a culmination of like that whole driver pairing. And because everybody talks about Michael, but, they don't really talk about Rubens. And I think Rubens is very much, kind of like almost like a Valtteri Bottas, like, a really good, very capable number 2 driver that like on his day was very capable of winning races. And, maybe even throw Sergio into that conversation as well. But obviously not quite as as dominant as their teammate, but yeah, I would say that I would agree with you. But I did that one Austrian Grand Prix from when was that, 2003 or 2004, whatever it was.
I was going to say 2003.
Yeah, I mean it's a long time ago, but that one image like of that podium is just like burned into my image. It's like one of like from that era of from Ferrari that stands out.
I think bottom line is, it's such a team sport. Yep. And as things start to converge, as these teams start to get closer together, if you are the lead driver, you are going to need the number 2 driver. Mm-hmm. There is no question about it. At some point during the season, you will need that individual.
Yep.
And it's best just to have a decent relationship, one that goes both ways, if you want to have success moving forward in this new era of Formula One that we are entering into, because convergence is going to happen fast, man. Mm-hmm. Like next season, like if we take a look at just how fast Mercedes has gone from being a second off of like Ferrari at the beginning of the season when Ferrari was strong, to now being faster and winning a Grand Prix. Give me a break, man. You're going to tell me that by the time we get to race number 10 next season, there's likely to be 6 drivers in contention for a race win.
Yeah.
There just is. Like, that's the way the development curve is going. And I just think if you're one of those drivers and you are the lead driver, it's best that you have some type of a okay relationship with your teammate. Now, I'm not saying you go out and you have beers and be best friends with each other, because that's not the way I was brought up through the sport, but you did respect your team.
Yeah,
you did respect your teammate.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the day. I got a bad feeling about this for Max. I just don't, I don't know if Sergio could.
The dynamic is different, right? Because we were like a few minutes ago, we were talking about, the situation that Toto is going to have at Mercedes between the up and coming prospect and the GOAT, right? And it's interesting because when you hear Lewis, and Lewis always says the right thing on the radio, right? He's like, what a great team win, congratulations to George, like congratulations and thanks to everybody. And then you kind of like compare that and juxtapose that with what, is like going over the comms at Red Bull. You got like Verstappen's kind of like really, I don't even know how to label it. That's, his statement. You got like Checo saying it shows who he really is. And I'm just like, yeah, I mean, competitiveness between, say, George and Lewis is one thing, but I mean, like, there's some seeds of some real toxicity now at Red Bull. I mean, especially if this is going back to, Monaco, which is 6+ months and like what, 12, 13 races ago. I mean, there's a lot of daylight between these two races, and it's just, yeah. I mean, it's not what just happens in the car on the track, but it's also what happens off the track. And yeah, it just blows my mind a little bit that this kind of dirty laundry kind of like got aired this afternoon.
Running out of time, but I want to talk about Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon real quick.
Sure, absolutely.
That's another relationship that seems to have taken a turn.
Well, you know, I mean, it was kind of crazy there. I mean, they had that coming together in the sprint race on Saturday, and it kind of ruined Fernando's day. I mean, you got like Crofty and Martin asking Otmar on the pit wall real time, you know, putting it to them like you know. And you know, like I thought that Otmar handled it like you know, like quite well, but you hear like on Sunday you hear like Esteban's engineer telling him, don't race Fernando. It's just like, you know, like I was just like, and he's kind of like questioning him. It's just like, there's obviously that these two don't like get along. And then like, didn't Fernando just say he's ready to kind of like draw that line and end his Alpine career, and he's looking forward to Aston Martin because
he's ready to go test
he's ready
the green
to go.
car.
He's ready to walk. He's ready to. Yeah.
I just Otmar was so upset Saturday night that, you know, I would love to have been a fly on the wall in that driver debrief session because he was livid.
Oh, he must have been.
It basically, you know, I think one of the things for him, because he's had to deal with the Esteban Sergio fallout from the Force India days. And now he's got to deal with something like this that actually involves Esteban. He takes on a new team and two drivers that are highly competitive. One of them is Fernando Alonso.
Who's kind of like in his own kind of class when it comes to this sort of thing, right?
100%. So he's got to manage that.
Yep.
And Esteban Ocon, who, like, people sometimes I think sleep on this guy. Like, he's a proven, like, not only is he a race winner, guy's a champion, for crying out loud, in Formula 3, and he beat Max Verstappen in that championship.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talk about like Carlos flying under the radar, not getting any respect or enough respect. Esteban gets zero respect.
Zero.
Yeah, he gets like no recognition of like his capabilities and what he's done in the past, and it blows my mind. I mean, this guy's legit. He's a good, excellent driver. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the guy who got to Formula One with zero money.
Yeah.
Like $0. None. Nothing. This is a guy who got there from hard work, talent, and right place, right time, and meeting the right people. And that's how it goes.
And he sat out a year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. He also had to sit out a year as well before coming back to Formula One. I mean, talk about a journey. I think at the end of the day, for Esteban, you know, I thought he didn't go up against Fernando towards the end of the race, even though he could. Even though he told the team over the top of the radio, they were telling him, like, hey, look, just bring the cars home. Don't get into it with Fernando. If he's quicker, let him by. And he's saying, yeah, I'm going to race Sebastian Vettel, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's what he kept saying over the radio. Fair enough. I think that there was at some points, though, that Esteban could have made his car a little wider, but he didn't. And letting Fernando go on to finish, I believe he finished 5th in this race on Sunday. Yeah, 5th. You know, Fernando's been driving remarkably this season. And I wonder how it's going to work at Aston Martin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, right? I mean, it's every time like Fernando's kind of like popped up, especially like in the later part of his career. Like every time he's made a move, I'm just like, how's it going to work this time? So I don't know. I really don't know.
Caps off to Valtteri Bottas. He was incredible today. And then Lance rounding out top 10. bringing home a point for Aston Martin, but Alfa Romeo being able to capture points thanks to Valtteri allows them to extend that lead. We have one more race left next weekend. Mark, this has been a season. We should probably do a season review on all of this stuff, but I'm kind of glad it's kind of ending when it is. I felt that last year it kind of went a little bit too long.
Yeah. Well, I feel like especially after the championship ended last year with all the controversy and the way that championship was decided.
Kind of feels like it never stopped.
It never stopped, and I feel like you can call it a hangover or like this cloud of 21 kind of hung over this season for a long time, but I don't know. I mean, like you say, we got one more race coming up next weekend, and I just kind of felt like, even though there was literally nothing at play. I mean, sure, you've got this battle between Charles and Checo, and you got some teams that could kind of swap places in the constructors, but they're minor storylines in the 2022 World Championship. But I kind of feel that just in general that Formula One kind of needed this weekend, because I feel that people that made the headlines were making headlines for the right reasons, and it was kind of like the race. It was like the weekend I think we all really needed, and I don't know what we're going to see in Abu Dhabi. I'm hoping we'd see a weekend similar to the one that we just had, because it felt like a breath of fresh air, and I feel walking away from this one is just like, oh, thank God, this one's over. There's one more, and then we can hang up the mics and we can come back in a couple of months and look ahead to the next season. But I feel really good after this one. I feel like we saw a lot of really hard but good racing, and it was just fun. It was just a fun weekend to watch.
I agree. Good storylines all around. Magnussen was heartwarming. It was just a great story.
Yep.
And same for George Russell. That also great for him. His family wasn't around to enjoy that win. Neither was Toto.
Neither was
Wolff.
Toto.
He was
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was also great story. George drove a hell of a race. I just think, I was talking to a couple of reporter friends of mine, who obviously it's their job to follow Formula One, and they said something similar to what you said, Mark. It's just like Formula One needed this. Mm-hmm. This is what it needed. It needs more of it, obviously moving forward. But it had felt up to this point like such a dry season, where we didn't have a lot, and there was more stuff going on off the track than there was going on the track. Mm-hmm. And I wish it was the other way around, because, obviously it's more exciting to talk about, good racing and great sporting stories, right? Than a lot of the times politics off the track. Sometimes it's fun, obviously, but, sometimes it's just not. Sometimes you just need some good racing. We really haven't had much good racing since summer break, right? Because I think, Hungary was decent. Then we had summer break, and then Red Bull just smashed everything coming out of summer break. It was nothing there. It was no.
Oh, it was home run after home run after home run. Yeah. If you're cheering for Max and Red Bull, that's great. And all credit to them. They've been unbeatable, but like you say, the racing hasn't been, particularly exciting for, quite a few, races. And this kind of really reversed that, that I wouldn't say storyline, but that situation. And it kind of showed that, if they get these cars figured out, this whole new era of Formula One, and it's not just like it was this weekend. We've seen several really good races throughout the year. It's just they've been a little bit too far and few between. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's been a bit of a tease at times, but yeah, it kind of changed that whole Red Bull dominance story, and they were kind of made the headlines this weekend for the wrong reasons rather than for the right ones. So,
well, on to Abu Dhabi.
Yep.
Let everybody know what you guys got going on over at Scuderia F1 Pod and where they can find you.
So you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere where you can enjoy and download your podcasts. We're there. We're Scuderia F1 Pod. You can find us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. And myself and Hammy, we do a weekly show, drops every Friday morning. And then we usually get together with Mr. Tim Hauraney here to wrap up each and every Grand Prix. One left. I can't believe it. Where did this season go? We're going to have to find something different to do with our Sunday nights.
Yeah, right. Mark, this has been fun. Thanks very much for your time. Really do appreciate it. If you want more TSN Racing Pod, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. You want more from me, you can get me on social media at Tim Hauraney. Please head on over to Spotify. Give TSN Racing Pod a 5-star review and a follow. Same goes for Apple Podcasts because it really helps us grow the pod. And we will be back later on this week to set up the final race of the 2022 Formula One season. We'll talk to y'all later.